So President Zelensky is under immense pressure on the international stage. He's trying to keep Ukraine at the front of the media attention, and things are not going his way. But it's also, he's struggling a little bit on the domestic side as well. You've been looking at that. Tell us a bit more about the pressures that Zelensky's under at home.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's done pretty well internationally. Internally, it's politics, not war. And there's always people that, fancy having a go at some stage. There's at least 3 people who've sort of come out and said words which are in some way opposition to what Zelensky's trying to do. His top former advisor is basically saying you should be talking. We've already said that his commander-in-chief of his military, maybe in lighter tones, but there's been some disagreement there. And he's sort of saying the same thing. The time has come to talk. The new player in the midst of this potential fight is Klitschko, who many people would remember is a world heavyweight boxing champion. A tall, very good-looking guy, strong-looking. He's now decided to go out on the world stage. He was never really a friend of Zelensky's anyway. He supported the previous guy, didn't quite make it. And there's always been sort of rumblings. He's now definitely put a foot forward. He smells blood. And he's basically saying that Zelensky is isolated in Ukraine and the time has come to have a conversation. He has also said we shouldn't switch presidents while there's a war on. Now that sounds like a really nice thing to say, doesn't it? But the clue is when there's not a war, we need a new president. And I think potentially there's at least one guy who wants to put his name forward, maybe more than one.
It's no great surprise, though, is it really? I mean, war, there has been this sort of spring offensive. We're not 2-year point yet, but we're rushing towards the 2-year point. Ukrainians would have hoped for the spring offensive would have liberated terrain. It hasn't. They've lost a lot of people. It's quite normal that the society would turn around and say, one of the options is we just keep fighting until we've achieved our objectives. But there is a very valid point that says, are you ever actually going to be able to achieve your objectives? How many more lives have to be lost to pursue that? Because ultimately, Ukraine is the underdog. They are the minnow to Russia's Goliath. And thirdly, how will this end? And the danger is that if Ukraine weakens itself much that Russia breaks through Ukraine's lines, then Ukraine could lose a lot more territory than it has. It's a huge country. It hasn't got that many armed forces. Most of them are, very busy on the front line. And if Russia was to break through, that could be catastrophic for Ukraine. So there is an element here of a conversation to be had. And part of that is driven by belief. Part of it will be an objective conversation. How many troops have we got left? How much money? Whatever. And some of it will be subjective. We've just got to have the faith. We've got to believe. And I think and it has been a difficult year for Zelensky. Yeah. And also, to be fair, Valery Zaluzhny, his head of the military, was always a lot more cautious anyway. I think rumours are that he was keen that the spring offensive didn't start this year, that it didn't start till next year. He wanted to be better trained. He said, we're using brand new equipment, which we've never used before. We're doing a type of warfare that we've never done before. Surely we should do a bit of training on that before we get going. Whereas the pressure was on from President Zelensky just to get on with it. And whatever, there's going to be a lot of post-mortems on the decisions, but it doesn't surprise me. Just whether actually blood will flow or not, it's another matter.
Well, as you said earlier, Zelensky has already said a number of times, I'm not going to give in. And I think he realises if he negotiated, he's got to give up, he's got to cede some territory. That won't be good for him back home. Whereas the others know that if that does happen, then they've got a chance.
But even if it does happen, I love the idealism of liberating Crimea, liberating the Donbass. But, practically speaking, when you look at everything that Ukraine was given, the West really doesn't have that much more to give. And it still couldn't move the front lines. Russia is not going to give up Crimea without a massive fight. And actually taking Crimea, given the access to it, is phenomenally difficult, far more difficult than lots of open countryside with a relatively open front line. So if Ukraine isn't able to do it east of Zaporizhia and in the Donbass, Crimea is an order of magnitude more difficult. So I think there has to be an air of pragmatism. And it might well be that President Zelensky's already decided that actually the right answer is to negotiate, but he doesn't want to be doing it from a position of weakness. And if he starts it from a position that I'm forced to because we want to carry on fighting, but actually, and we think we can do it, but we're being forced to, that might not be quite the same weakness as actually we failed. Can we stop fighting now, please? So I suspect there's some really interesting dynamics behind the scene here.